First of all, I have to say that when I was asked to be church lay leader, I know that giving a sermon was not in the job description. I figured maybe an occasional liturgist, but never would I be up here doing this. So, partially in retaliation, I forced Sam to use the King James Version of the scripture lesson today. Which actually, I struggled to find a good scripture passage for today that would tie in somehow with my walk, journey, whatever, on the Camino de Santiago. Camino de Santiago translates literally as the Walk of St. James, but is more commonly referred to as the Way of St. James. So I turned to the book of James, which I had never read before, and sadly found nothing. Nothing, zip, zilch, nada, that would help me. It shouldn't surprise most of you to know that books have informed and influenced my life from the time I was a child. And so I remembered, while I was thinking about it, I remembered the story of Ruth, which I first read about in a book from the public library. I loved that story, and I read it over and over and over again before I realized that it was based on a book of the Bible. So, hence the scripture passage. I realize that it's most commonly used in weddings, but I think it fits what I learned. So from Ruth chapter 1, verses 7 through 17. Wherefore she, Naomi, went forth out of the place that she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters. Why will thee go with me? Are there yet any sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your own way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have no hope, if I should have a husband also, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And she said, Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so unto me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. 2 years ago at my high school class reunion, my 40th class reunion, a friend and classmate, Kim Johnson, said that she wanted to walk a portion of the Camino de Santiago in 2 years, when we would be 60. I read a mystery years ago that was set in Paris in the 13 or 1400s, and the main character, a woman, had to solve the murder mystery by walking the Camino de Santiago. That is literally all I remember about the book, but it was the first time I had heard about the Camino, and I was intrigued. So almost without thinking, I said to Kim that I would love to go with her. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Camino de Santiago, it is an ancient pilgrimage route in Spain. There are many versions of the story of how it came to be, but the one I like best was the one that was told to us by our cathedral tour guide, and it goes something like this. Jesus told his disciples to go forth unto all the ends of the earth and spread the good news. So James set off, and when he arrived at Finisterre, Spain, which translates literally as the end of the world, he thought he had reached the end of the world because all he could see in front of him was ocean, which is the Atlantic Ocean. So he finished spreading the good news, and there is some controversy about how he accomplished that. And then he turned to go back, and on his way back he died. And his 2 lead disciples bought a cart and a stubborn mule from a little old lady. And once they loaded the body of James onto the cart, the mule became docile. And he walked and walked and walked until he refused to go any further. And that is where James was buried, in what is now Santiago. And when his disciples died, they were buried one on either side. And many, many centuries later, in the 9th century, the bodies were discovered, dug up, and reburied in the cathedral. At one point in time, Santiago was the 3rd most important city in Christianity, behind Rome and Jerusalem. A year ago, we finalized our travel plans, and our travel partners, Kim's 19-year-old daughter, Catherine, who will be a sophomore at Simpson this year, and another high school classmate and friend, Denise Dixon Core. Whenever I told people I was walking a portion of the Way of St. James, I often got puzzled looks and would have to explain to them that it's a pilgrimage route, but I was just walking it to walk, not for any real religious reasons. I've never considered myself particularly spiritual, so I felt obligated to make people know that, you know. There are, I think, about a dozen pilgrimage routes that lead to Santiago. We were walking a portion of the French route, which is the longest and most popular, and depending on where you start, you can walk 400 or 500 miles. But we were only walking 70 miles over 5 days, the last 70 miles, and the minimum amount that you can walk in order to get your certificate of completion, or Compostela. And in addition, we were not walking with 20-pound packs on our back or staying in hostels or albergues. Kim found a tour company that ferried our luggage from one overnight stop to the next and made reservations in 2, 3, and 4-star hotels. So we walked with day packs. Once we sent in our initial deposits a year ago, it was time to get ready. And what does that involve? Well, what I came to think of is gearing up. You have to have the proper shoes. And let me tell you, $50 Clark's walking shoes from Todd's Shoes aren't proper. Backcountry Outfitters became my go-to store. You also have to wear clothing that is moisture wicking. And I really thought I was set. I have cotton T-shirts, and I was ready. And then you start doing the research, and you realize that cotton is not a moisture wicking fiber. It's a breathable fiber, true, but it's not moisture wicking. You need clothes that will wick the moisture away, dry quickly, and keep you cool. So what is? Polyester. And I know I'm not the only person in this room that wore double knit polyester as a child. And my mother's not here to this service, so I can tell you that I was forced to wear double knit polyester. And I spent decades avoiding polyester, only to start loading up on it in order to get ready for the trip. So I'm geared up today because I didn't know how much moisture I would have to wick away, and here I am. I also learned that what I'd known intellectually is really true, that wool is a year-round fiber. And so all of my socks, my 3 pairs of hiking socks, are smart wool, and they do wick the moisture away. They do dry quickly, and an added side benefit is that your shoes don't smell as much because the moisture is not being held in. Just a tip for all of you. It shouldn't come as a surprise that I also read books. Joyce Rupp, whom many of you may have heard of, is a nun, Catholic nun, in Des Moines, and she wrote a book about her trip on the Camino called Walk in a Relaxed Manner. I also read a book called I'm Off Then by German comedian Happe Kerkeling, who literally just got up and did the walk. Surprisingly, I found his book to be the more spiritual of the two, perhaps because he wrestled more with his relationship with God than Joyce Rupp had to. I worked my way through Spanish in 2 apps, was able to, decipher a menu, sort of, pick out a word or two in a slow conversation, and could sort of make my shopping purchases, my shopping questions known in stores. I did some physical therapy to strengthen my hips, to support my back, which at 60, it's always a fun thing to find out that your top half weighs more than your bottom half. But the real way I prepared was by walking. I learned early on that I don't like to walk inside. Walking in an oval is just no fun, no matter how entertaining your walking partner is. And I also learned that I'm a fair weather walker. Conditions have to be just right, as defined by me, in order for me to walk. So while I walked a lot last fall, my walking kind of came to a halt during the winter months. It was a mild winter, so there wasn't really any excuse, except that I had started a part-time job in Des Moines, which meant that I didn't get home until after dark most days. Again, one of those conditions that have to be just right for walking. People who knew what I was doing would ask me how my training was coming, and I was usually pretty vague in my answers. As the days got longer, though, I did manage to walk more, but walking once or twice a week for an hour each time is not preparation for walking 70 miles over 5 days. So once my job ended in mid-April, it was time to get serious. So I walked. I walked from my house to the Catholic Church and back, 3.8 miles, from my house to North 15th Street and back, 4.2 miles. I walked from Banner Lake to the trailhead and back, which Map My Walk said was 11.79 miles, but I always rounded that up to 12 because I felt better. We have a lot of wonderful trails in this town, and it made my walking a lot easier. I also walked a route in my neighborhood that I thought of as the hilly route, and there are a lot of hills in Indianola, believe it or not. I walked up and down as many hills as I could in an hour, and that was really hard at first, but got easier as I got stronger, but was no preparation for the hills that we found in Spain. Denise and I often walked together. We talked about the details of our lives. We planned the trip as much as we could, given how many unknowns there were. But we just walked and talked a lot. She was better at identifying bird calls than I am, but we both appreciated and enjoyed the landscape. Often I walked alone. Walking alone gave me endless hours to think and commune with nature in my own way. I can't stand earbuds or headphones. I really don't like anything in my ears. And even this microphone is kind of driving me crazy. So it was just me and the trail or sidewalk, the birds and the trees, or whatever wildlife darted across the path in front of me. Squirrels, rabbits, birds, dogs, even a deer or two when we were walking on the Somerset Trail. I really enjoyed listening to those sounds of nature that surrounded me. And I also found that I noticed things more. Walking through a neighborhood gives you a whole different perspective than when you drive through it. So I have a whole lot of new favorite houses that I keep track of now when I'm walking. And there's this house on the McVeigh Trail that took out their backyard swimming pool in early spring. I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to walk down that trail again in October when the leaves come down so that I can see what they did with that extra space. In the last month leading up to our departure, I walked a minimum of 4 miles a day and often felt as though all I had accomplished in any given day was walking, and then would have to remind myself that that really was all I would accomplish once we left. And we left at the end of May, spent a few days in Madrid, and then took the train to Sarria, which is that is the last possible place you can start in order to get those 70 miles in and receive your Compostela. There were 10 of us in the tour group, and we started walking on June 3rd. I'm sure you've all heard of the definition of insanity that goes something like, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result each time. Well, in many ways, that's what our walking was like, except when I explained that to my friends, they said, no, we expect to get to a different ending point every day, and we did. Because Kim had broken her ankle in January, we matched, and she was still walking with difficulty. We matched our pace to hers. We managed a brisk pace of 2 miles an hour, which means that it often took us 9 hours to get our 14 miles a day in. That did, of course, include the morning coffee break, lunch, the afternoon beverage break of your choice, and with any large group, or especially for women, restroom breaks. Some of you may have heard me worry about whether there would be enough restrooms along the way, and thank goodness that was never a problem. The first day we walked was misty and cool, which is actually perfect walking weather. And it provided two surprises for us. One, that we were surrounded by extremely beautiful scenery. In spite of how tired we were, and we were tired, we always were able to comment and appreciate on how beautiful the scenery was. A side note, we were all fascinated with all the cows we saw. And you would think that 3 native Iowans and a native Illinoisian, if that's the right word, would not be oohing and ahhing over cows, but I had a lot of cow pictures on my camera when I got home. And not surprisingly, this Iowan had never smelled as much fresh country air as I did in those 5 days. The other thing we found out was that we had been blessed with exceptionally kind tour members. When we struggled into Puerto Marin at the end of that first day after 9 hours of walking, we were met individually by 2 members of the group who both said, we're so glad to see you, we've been worried about you, we're glad you're here. And these were people we had literally just met the night before. I am not sure if the shoe had been on the other foot, no pun intended, if I would have had the same reaction. I'm not even sure I would have recognized them, to be honest with you. And the next morning at breakfast, they all said to us, "We are so proud of you. Keep up the good work. We'll be looking for you tonight." So we benefited from that kindness many times over the week. The Camino is almost like a separate community. One greeting that you hear often is Buen Camino, which translates literally as good walk or have a good walk. But it really has more spiritual overtones to it than that, and I can't quite describe those. Denise was the first one who used it, and after that, then we all used it. When we were passed, which we often were, and sometimes when we passed other people, which didn't happen often, but we were always glad when it did. Of course, they invariably passed us a few down the road. You also tend to see the same people over and over again. We would see someone one day and then not again for a day or two. And one person that we saw, every member of our group walked at different paces, although some of them walked together. But we all knew who Florida Dad was, and I don't know his real name. I know that he was walking with his 10-year-old daughter Sophia, and he's from Florida. We pieced together bits and pieces of his story, but not very much. And when we saw him at our last beverage break, coffee in this case, in the afternoon as we were walking into Santiago, he said to us, Santiago is a small town, and it's 100,000 people. It was the biggest city we had been in, other than Madrid. Santiago is a small town. We'll see you again. We all thought he was crazy, but in fact, we saw him at least twice more during the time that we were in Santiago, and there were other instances of that as well. We had many chances to get to know the other members of our group, and we discussed several times why we were all doing this. One gentleman had a son who had done the entire route 2 years before, and he wanted to do it so that he would be able to experience in some small way what his son had experienced. Others were just doing it to do it. It was something different to prove that they could. One thing we all agreed on was that we had not started the journey for any spiritual reasons, but that we were finding them along the way with a capital W. One night after a long supper, and suppers in Spain are always long, we would be in the restaurant at 8:30 and straggling out at 10:30, and the Spanish people would just be coming in at 10. I mentioned I was doing this sermon. They all thought I was crazy. I agree. But they still had words of advice for me. From Catherine, the journey is always longer than the map says. From someone else, walking gives you time to think big thoughts. And from another person, slow down and take time. There were many moving and inspirational moments along the trip. Arriving in Santiago was one of them. Technically, it was the shortest day, but I think we did really the most walking that day. It was also the hottest day we had walked. The temperature was in the upper 80s, close to 90, and we were exhausted, and I know I was dehydrated. But standing in line in the pilgrim's office to get the final stamp on our pilgrim's passport and get that Compostela meant that we had accomplished our goal. We had done what we set out to, and we were very proud of ourselves. Hearing nuns sing their 3 o'clock prayers in a Baroque church attached to a Benedictine convent was incredibly beautiful. And then there's the cathedral itself, which was established in 1075. They offer 2 daily pilgrims' masses, one at noon and one at 7:30. And our guide told us that they would be swinging the giant incense burner, or botafumero, that evening. The botafumero was started as a way, the early pilgrims spent the night in the cathedral, and that was started as a way to mask their smells. I will admit that my primary goal in going was to the Pilgrim's Mass that evening was to see the Botafumero, because I'm obviously not Catholic and I don't speak Spanish, so the only other reason to go would have been as a recognition of what we had accomplished by making it that far. But all church services have similar rhythms, and which I noticed on an earlier trip to Denmark when I sat through a Danish Lutheran church service in Danish. All church services have similar rhythms, and at some point in the service, the cathedral was filled with the voices of hundreds of people saying the Lord's Prayer in their own language. I also found the Botafumero to be not just an object of curiosity, but something that ended up being very moving as well. The Spanish-speaking members of our group said that the homily, loosely translated, went that no matter where we come from or what our reasons are, we are all going in the same direction. So what did I learn? Because this isn't just a travel log. You didn't come to church just to hear me talk about a trip. Well, as I already mentioned, I learned the virtues of polyester, as well as when I like to walk best. And after thinking of walking as a chore, I learned that I really do kind of enjoy it, and that this probably won't be my last walking trip. I learned that a mile can be short or long, depending on how long you've walked. And I learned that I would rather walk in Spain, where they almost always stop for you when you step into the crosswalk, versus here when you're never sure if people are going to stop for you or not. I learned that you don't have to carry a Bible or be intimately acquainted with the Bible in order to be a spiritual person. And I learned, as Catherine said, that the journey is often longer than the map says, that you do have to slow down and take your time, and that I did think big thoughts, but mostly when I was walking alone. And in fact, that's when, both before and after, when much of the sermon was planned. But I also learned that God is there when old friends become new friends, when new friends become old friends. He is there in the sound of the birds in the trees along the path. And he is there in the ways the landscape changes from oranges and yellows and reds in the fall to browns and blacks and some white in the winter, and in the many, many shades of green in the spring. He is there in the sound that a creek makes when it rushes downstream after an early morning rain. And he is there again in those amazing, unidentifiable smells of spring. God is there when you walk with friends and laugh and talk and create new memories. And he's there when you've walked all day long the day before, and believe me, the last thing you want to do is get up and do it all over again. He is there when you gather at the end of a long day and laugh and talk and share that day with friends. Most of all, I learned that as Ruth promised Naomi, so God makes the same promise to us. God is with you always. He says, when she said, "Whither thou goest, I will go," God makes that promise to us. Not just in the big moments, the big moments of happy and sad, when we all turn to him in prayer or hope, but that he is with you in the small moments, perhaps most especially in those small moments. As the priest said, no matter where we come from or how we got there, we are all going in the same direction, and God is with you every step of the way along that path. I'd like to close with this prayer from Joyce Rupp's book that she and her walking partner, Father Tom Pfeffer, wrote. He passed away, incidentally, 6 months after their journey of a cerebral hemorrhage, which should be, again, another lesson to all of us. I prayed this prayer daily while we were gone. Please pray with me. Guardian of my soul, guide me on my way today. Keep me safe from harm. Deepen my relationship with you, your earth, and all your family. Strengthen your love within me, that I may be a presence of your peace in our world. Amen.